With unemployment at an all-time low, there's a pretty good chance that if you're tuning into this podcast, at some point you'll have experienced struggles in finding new team members. In part one of this series, titled How to Recruit, Retain, and Manage a Productive Team, we dive into some of the strategies to help you create a more modern and relevant hiring mindset and process. This is part one, so be sure to hit subscribe and turn on your notifications to make sure you don't miss out on the upcoming 2 episodes of this series. And as always, please leave us your comments, your feedback, and your experiences below. And be sure to share this video with someone else. Cheers. Hello, listeners and viewers. Welcome back to the SiteShed podcast. You're joining your host today, Matt Jones, with my co-host, Rob Kropp from Pravar Group. Rob, welcome back to the SiteShed podcast.
Thanks for having me, mate. Really looking forward to today.
We've been just discussing offline. You were on the show all the way back in 2018. It feels like yesterday.
Oh, no, it's so long ago, wasn't it? It feels like only yesterday, but it's a lot of time since.
Yeah, no, it's been good. So you're, for the listeners out there that aren't familiar with Rob, Pravar Groups is a great business coaching program. Actually, you might want to give the spiel on Pravar Group.
Yeah, for sure, mate. We're a business coaching company based here in Australia, primarily focusing on trades, construction, and service-based businesses all around Australia. And what we're very good at is helping guys in the trades and construction space absolutely make some really positive changes to their business, and which enables them to reconnect with their family. So a lot of the guys that we come across with are doing it for the family, but one of the biggest things that they struggle with is time with their families, with their wife and their kids. So yeah, we're renowned for helping them balance their business and their life and make really positive changes to both, which is great.
So we've got millions of different topics that we could riff on, and we probably will looking forward. But in this specific mini series that we're putting together here, which we've titled "How to Recruit, Retain, and Manage a Productive Team," essentially tackling one of the common issues that we speak with tradies and contractors all over the world right now, is that whole conversation around how to find and keep team members. We've done a lot of podcasts on sort of similar topics in the past, with everything going from, profiling right through to, retention tactics like, training and initiatives and that kind of thing. So it's one of those topics that never really gets old, never gets stale. There's always things you can implement to update an existing process. And I think for you guys out there that are listening and or watching this over at YouTube, take this on board. Like, this is sort of in the trenches stuff that's happening, real world today. And it is an evolution. So perhaps, what you're currently doing might be working, but there may be little tweaks you could apply to it to make something work a little bit better. And that's what we're all about here. So thanks again, Bobby, for coming back on the show. Really appreciate it. And love being able to chat to you and all the stuff you're doing over there at Pravar Group.
Yeah, thanks for having me, mate. Looking forward to today.
So in the first episode, we're going to talk specifically to recruitment, and as we sort of touched on, offline, this isn't so much about the whole how to write an ad and post it on Seek and that kind of stuff. It's more foundational, I suppose, and more coming at it with the perspective of like strategy and the thought process behind what that might look like. And I'm probably going to have a bit of insight in this area too. Like, we've had some pretty huge growth within our team over the last 12 months, and there's some things that have worked and there's things that have not worked. So it'd be interesting to sort of riff on some of these topics. Is this a whole? I'm guessing this whole recruitment. I know for a fact because we've got a lot of mutual clients, but this recruitment conversation is one, I suppose, that is an ever an ongoing issue. I think for the time that I've been running my business, for the last 12, 13 years, and the podcast, since 2016, this is one topic that has never, ever, how do I say, people have never feel like they've been able to tick the box and resolve the problem. It's always an ongoing thing. So I'm keen to hear your take on the whole recruitment side of things.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's like we've got about 100 clients on the books at the moment around Australia, and I think I would dare say that every one of our guys, every one of our clients are facing this challenge at the moment. And I think if we look at the current landscape, especially in Australia, where we primarily work across, we're in definitely over the last couple of years, the labour market's one of the biggest challenges. Finding really good people is one of the biggest challenges. If you talk to any trades and construction style business, that's one of their biggest challenges they face. And especially here in Australia, you've also got one of the lowest levels of unemployment on record in years and years and years. So I think trying to attract really good candidates is one of the biggest challenges that anyone faces. But I think one big myth that I want to start breaking down to begin with is that a lot of guys that I speak to, they're like, "Oh, I just can't find anyone." And the reality is, there's still good people out there. There's still definitely good people out there, and there's still people out there who do want to look for other employment opportunities. But I think one of the biggest problems that a lot of business owners face is that they have this mindset that no one's good out there. All the good guys are working for themselves. And the landscape in recruitment's changed. It's absolutely changed. And the biggest problem that I see is a lot of business owners are recruiting today in 2022 like they were back in 2020 or 2019. And the landscape has absolutely changed. So they're trying to use the same strategy today, which worked many, many years ago. And they're wondering why they're not attracting really good people. So I think that's where we want to put our focus on today, on today's podcast, is how do we recruit in today's environment, and how do we cut through all the other noise, just like you teach in the marketing side of things. How do we cut through all the other noise to get to the good people who may not be happy with their current employer and are looking for a better environment or a better culture or a better business to come and work for, rather than having the mindset that there's no good people out there. So I think that's one of the biggest issues that we need to tackle up front, is the mindset of a lot of people that we just got to break through that to begin with.
Yeah, and I think, you touched on a really big point there, and I say this all the time, with people that we work with and over the podcast and stuff like that. Like, don't for a second think that recruitment is not a marketing exercise. You're 100% marketing your business to potential candidates, and it's the difference between, like first impressions, make a big difference. When somebody's coming to you, potentially looking for a new job, the difference between how you cast that vision initially and the guy next door, could be the difference between them picking the phone up. Yes, I completely agree. There is always talent out there. It's it's true. Like, anyone typically that is any good is normally has a job. So the conversation that we've noted recently is not so much about how you should be looking for people that are actively out there looking for jobs, but it's about how you can make yourself look more appealing than perhaps the job they've currently got. And you're sort of running the gamut there between, like, it's a good exercise to go on when you're trying to build brand and authority and position yourself and your business in an expert kind of status and an expert kind of sphere where people are attracted to that, and they want to be able to come and work for a business that has got clear vision, and it's got clear opportunity, and it's got career path, and all these kind of things that most businesses typically are horrible at communicating.
And I think we just have to accept, like, let's face it, it is hard to find good quality people right now. Like, I can absolutely agree with that. And I think you would agree with that, and all the listeners would absolutely agree with that. Like, but we have to accept which market we're in at the moment. In the property game, you're either in a buyer's market or you're in a seller's market. And where we've come from in the over the last couple of years is we've been in a seller's market. And right now the market's changing, and we're moving more towards a buyer's market. If you had have asked me 6 months ago, like we're in November now in 2022, if you had asked me 6 months ago, we were absolutely in a candidates market. It was tight, and candidates had the upper hand in terms of demands, hours, what they wanted for a job, what they were willing to accept for pay, and all those types of things. But what I've noticed over the last couple of months is the market's changing back towards an employer's market, not an employee's market. So I think the tides are starting to turn a little bit. But
why do you think that is?
I think at the moment, whether a lot of the listeners like it or not, the market's starting to tighten, and the market's starting to crunch, where a lot of trades won't notice it right now because the work that builders especially and developers and strata managers and building managers, a lot of that work that they've got locked in their pipelines today and for the next 12 months is what they've won over the last 12 to 18 months from really busy times. But what we're noticing across the board is that inquiries are starting to slow down. So in 9 or 12 months, I think into next year, I think the market's going to really hurt. I believe that it's going to tighten up. And so now that the market is starting to turn in the industry, I think the heat's come out of the industry a little bit, and it's going to come out a lot more with interest rates continuing to go up. The heat's coming out. So therefore, a lot of little subcontractors and one-man bands who used to build decks or do plumbing work or electrical work and all those types of things, those guys are probably slowing down a little bit. So those guys are coming onto the market a little bit more. Or the bigger companies who were just growing and growing and growing and grabbing anyone they could into the market, they're now starting to loosen the edges of their teams. And so I think now that the heat's coming out of the industry, I think the edges are loosening in terms of the availability of stock on the market from when it comes to an employment sense.
Interesting. Yeah, I suppose it's one of those, like it or not, in the wake of COVID, there's been, I suppose the world's been thrown into this cyclone of, employment related issues that we've never really seen before. And, in the wake of it, I suppose we're starting to see some of these, ramifications appearing. And of course, this isn't always a bad thing either. Like I know people sometimes have this whole, obviously fear sells papers, right? So people, take on board what they read in the paper and what they listen in the news. But like so often we find some of these emerging situations just present amazing opportunity and opportunity to, especially from a recruitment point of view, when we're looking at, how to recruit the right team members, like a lot of that conversation can often be like when we're talking about the right team members, it's offloading team members that are not necessarily the right team members. And some of these opportunities and some of these scenarios that we're experiencing do bring forward these realities where we're like, well, like you said before, maybe we need to trim the edges here. Who can we, looking deeper into numbers, looking deeper into performance, looking deeper into, the greater strategy, zooming out a little bit, as opposed to what you're saying before, where people are like, quick, just bring everyone in, and it's a very sort of narrow focus. Like I think a lot of those conversations now are sort of more strategic, and people are sort of been starting to appreciate the fact that, that whole conversation around finding A players is becoming more and more relevant. And it's certainly our experience at the moment as well within the agency. Like we're at the point where we've had so much insane growth. We're just hiring all the time. And now we're like, okay, let's just slow this down. Let's work more on quality and training our team members now and making sure like our programs are evolving and our services are evolving, all that kind of stuff. And so, like all different areas within a business, I think HR, recruitment, team, people, whatever you guys call it, like that is one of those areas within a business which you can't afford to not be agile in. And I think that's where a lot of businesses sort of get, come unstuck, is that, like you said earlier in the piece, they're sort of stuck in how to recruit in year 2000, and they're not adjusting and adapting their, recruitment processes to fit current climates. And so that ability to be agile, and in truth, that's one of the main advantages of a small business. It's the ability to be agile. Like if you're talking with, conglomerates and these massive corporations, like there's so much red tape there, like their agility is next to zero because of all the red tape and all the hoops they got to jump through. But as small business owners, like we've got this unique position where we can make change and we can pivot and we can really implement, like an agile practice, which can really move the needle and steer the ship in a completely different direction as we need to.
Yeah, correct. And I think where a lot of business owners have to adjust in today's market is back a couple of years ago, you could throw a seek ad up and get plenty of resumes through, and you would get quality applicants, and then you could have a slow recruitment process and you could take your time, do all your reference checks and all those types of things. But in today's market, like that's a passive style recruitment strategy. Yeah. In today's market, throwing a seek ad up isn't going to cut the mustard anymore.
Yeah, it's
and
noise.
It's your ability to be able to have an active strategy, not a passive strategy. And so that's where the market's changed in recruitment. Is where in today's terms you've got to go into the market and um, and find those people who are already got jobs and cut through all the noise to be able to talk to the right people. And I think you're right there. As a small business owner, it's your ability to be able to be agile in your approach. Now, when I talk to a lot of people in the construction space, in the trade space, I always say to them, ask the question, "What's your biggest challenge?" "Oh, I can't find good people." And I'm like, "Okay, well, what are you actually doing to be able to find good people right now?" "Oh, yeah, I'm asking around and I've got a seek ad up and everything." But it's like, come on, dude! Like, you've got to get out there and actually be actively hunting for recruits, and that means doing things that make you feel uncomfortable, which is like, for example, using talent search within Seek. It's talking to all your suppliers. It's asking all you guys for referrals. It's ringing around in your local area, which is ringing all the one-man bands at Baz time and asking them how happy they are in being a one-man band, and are they looking for a job that's going to pay them consistently and earn more money than they think they are as a one-man band, or going and headhunting from your competitors, or going and finding out in the local area which businesses are unfortunately folding at the moment, and finding out who's working there and how you can attract those people across. So that's when I talk about active strategies, they're all the things that you've actually got to prioritize every day, every week, and having conversations on the front foot, trying to find people rather than just dropping a Seek ad up or a social media post saying, "Hey, we're hiring." So there's two big differences, and one gets nothing, and one is an active game which attracts good people in the end of the day.
Yeah, and like you were saying before, like some of these things are uncomfortable, and typically they're uncomfortable because they're new, and it's like people, fundamentally don't like change, and that's not news to anyone out there. Like we have this conversation with people all the time, like we want to help you tell your story better, and this is again like recruitment is a marketing exercise, and like being able to tell that story better is really important when you're trying to communicate with these types of people. Excuse the baby in the background.
Glad it's yours, not mine.
Someone just woke up. Yeah, it's like, okay, well, then what steps have we got to take to be able to, tell our story in a fashion which is going to want people to, pick up the phone or fill in a web form or come speak to us or whatever. And I think you touched on something that's really important there in terms of, how you go about this. The seek ad kind of thing. Sure, maybe like, I'm not saying don't do that, but there's a lot of opportunity there in leveraging the networks of, our existing teams and our existing colleagues. And there's some great frameworks, that you can implement for that sort of thing as well. So, again, it's thinking outside the box with a lot of these things. And it's putting, I suppose, like a bit of a modern spin on something that in truth, most people are probably doing in an outdated way.
Absolutely. And I think, like, I know that, and I know it's not a quick fix today, but the fundamental, we're going to, in the second and third part of this series, we'll talk about retention, which is super important because there's no point recruiting if you can't retain them. And then at the back end, we'll talk about management because you've got to manage them. Because a lot of people are fearful these days in tight labor markets of managing people in the fear that they're going to lose them. So we'll talk more about that down the line. But I think one thing that the listeners can absolutely do today, which doesn't solve the problem, is in the immediate terms. But you've got to be, when it comes to recruitment, you've got to play a long game, and you've got to position your business and create that environment, create that culture, create that space where you want to attract people to come and want to work for you in your organization. And that's just not what you do internally inside the business, but it's also how it's reflected in outward facing in the marketplace around how you go about doing things. And I know some of our clients, for example, and one in particular, and a couple of others have gone down this line where we've got a Sparky who's based in Bendigo, regional Victoria. Couldn't for the life of him find a tradesman. It was literally just recruitment after recruitment for 6 months. And so he went and invested in a videographer, and they spent time videoing the business, showcasing the work, the team, the culture, the organization, the customers they do work for, the type of work, the high levels of quality, because you can write all these things in ads, but a video tells 1,000 words and your socials tells 1,000 words as well. And so ever since he's got that out, not only has he won more work, he's won more profitable work, he's attracted other builders and other customers to be able to do work for, but he's also started attracting team members because people had seen his ads in the past, but now he's able to showcase his business uh, from a storytelling and a social media and a videography side of things. He's now using that as a recruitment strategy, because that there is attracting other people rather than just writing that on a CCAD, which words can't explain. Does that kind of make sense?
Well, I mean, it's essentially like content will always be king, and we live in this environment now where it's never been more relevant, and it's one of the huge shifts that we've made within in the agency too. It's like working with businesses that are gonna that we can help create and leverage content to tell their story better, because the reality is in a lot of these marketing scenarios, or services like your ads, your Google ads. I mean, you go to Google and you type in Plumber Sydney or something like that, and you look at all the copy and paste cliche ads and content, and like it's just all the same crap. It's just noise. And like you can really make impact with creating great content. And this client of yours is a great example. Like they're using content to over in the recruitment side of their business, which is having a ripple effect in all other areas. And I mean, we've been talking about this for years. The difference there is like 99% of the people we're talking to today are not going to do it, and they're not going to do it because it's not comfortable, and it's not comfortable because they've never done it. And so it's like chicken or the egg, right? So you don't get good at these things until you start practicing, but you don't want to practice because you're not good at it. Like, and this is the thing we're saying with people. Like, it's just you got to invest in these things in order for it to, for it to work. And most, especially the advantage of trades is you work in businesses where, in most cases, you've got like this amazing outcome that you can showcase. You've got this beautiful like home that you've built, or you've this nice switchboard you've installed, or this beautiful garden that you've manicured, or whatever it is. Perhaps not a lovely drain you've unblocked, but you get the point, right? Like there's so many ways and so many opportunities there, and it's, I mean, in truth, it's probably relevant in any business. You and I just work in the trade, so that's sort of what's front and center. But like, there's so many opportunities there, to capture great content which can really tell a story. But in my experience, until it becomes part of the process, it never ever happens. It always gets relegated on the list of important things to do. And like recruitment is the same, like it's okay. Well, until we decide and until we make this part of our process, or until we use, update our process to include, these new things that we want to do within the marketing and recruitment departments, then it's always going to stay the same.
Correct. And I think it's something that we have to get the listeners to face the facts around recruitment is, I live by the mantra of always be recruiting. We call it ABR at Pravar,
Sure.
always be recruiting. And in sales, you'll hear sales experts call it ABC, always be closing. But
Yeah.
in recruitment terms, you always have to be recruiting, because when it comes to running a trades and construction business, I'm a massive believer that if you're not turning over anywhere between $2 to $3 million, you're kind of wasting your time, because anything less than that, you really don't have a lifestyle business. You've got a highly leveraged self-employed job. In my opinion, you're stuck in your business, and so the only way you're going to get there is to build and develop your ground crew, which is your boots on the ground. And so if you want to go from 500K to a million to 1.5 to 2.53, you've got to get 2, 3, 6, 8, 10 guys guys and girls on the ground. You have to be developing your team all the time, and you've always got to be growing your team, because let's face it, in the trades and construction base, you sell labor hours, and you can't make more revenue if you don't sell more labor available hours. So I think the listeners have to accept that recruitment has to be a fundamental key strategic play that they're focusing on every quarter. And you've always got to be thinking about it. It reminds me of a carpenter in Brisbane that we met 4 years ago, who's doing $2 million. Last financial year did 8. He's now got a team of 50 people. And back when we first met him a couple of years ago, he couldn't get anyone He just couldn't find carpenters, and there's plenty of carpenters in Brisbane who can't find good carpentry gangs. But this guy's got guys queuing at the door wanting to come and work for him because he's got a great business, a great organization, a good culture. He's got a winning business. He's turning over $8 million now in a highly profitable space. He's got an awesome team. They do great quality work, and they've got a great outward presence in terms of the work that they do. And good people want to work in great organizations.
Mm.
And that's the difference between that business and a builder or a carpenter in the Brisbane market who can't find anyone. Why is it that he can, but they can't? It all comes down to strategy and their presence in the marketplace, which attracts good people rather than struggling to find good people. There's a big difference between the two.
Yeah, and that'll always be hiring. That's something I suppose that well, that was taught to me many, many years ago by a very successful plumbing company that I worked with, and they were always, recruiting and hiring, and they were always getting, like, funnily enough, even sole traders and stuff would come in, and he'd coach, like, give them coaching, consulting tips, and at the end of it, he'd be like, you know what, why don't you just come work for us? It'd be a lot easier. You don't got to worry about all this. He was always recruiting these, really good candidates, and they had, relatively decent retention. I suppose this is going to blend into the next topic, of course, when we're talking about, how to retain and keep your team members. But yeah, I think that's also where a lot of businesses probably fall over. It's and in truth, it's something, even with my own business right now, we need to put more focus into, like, the development of the team to improve, like, maybe not so much retention, I suppose, but more just like career advancement and career path, and, like, helping them, become better at what they do and improve their skills and all that kind of stuff. So you're right. It's strategy, and you've got to think about these things, because it's so easy just to get, like, do the recruitment, do the hiring, place people, and then, sort of have that jobs done attitude, and it's not until something falls over when you go, man, if I'd just put a bit more effort into, you know, continuing this process and continuing helping them advance their career and that kind of thing, they probably never would have left.
Correct. And I think a lot of business owners need to start really respecting what it takes to do great recruitment, and they've got to see it as a fundamental strategic play of every month. They've got to be focusing on it in what their planning is.
Yeah.
Because when you're growing a business, you've got to continually be hiring. And so one of the most important things when it comes to growing a business, your limitation, there's two limitations when it comes to growing a business. Number one is working capital or cash to fund the growth. And number two is people. And so if you don't have enough working capital to fund it, you'll run out of cash flow. And if you don't have the people, you just will struggle. Despite how much work's sitting on your desk, you'll struggle to be able to work through that. And so when it comes to recruitment, one of the first steps in recruitment is always evaluating the gaps. You've got to do gap analysis within your team. You've got to be able to think, what's the gap in my skills? What's the gap in my experience? What's the gaps in the tickets within my business? And if you can always be constantly evaluating that, you're always analyzing the gaps so that you're constantly removing yourself off site and off the tools and up into a management position. But you're always then manipulating and strategically working out who's my next hire, where they're going to come from, what's the experience I'm looking for. Is it a senior guy, like a leading hand? Is it a tradesman? Is it an apprentice, a TA, a labourer? What's the next gap that I'm filling? So if business owners can start taking a step back and thinking a lot more strategic, then these are the parts that help them overcome the recruitment challenge, because they're fulfilling the right role with the right person at the right time. And that's what helps them solve their problems along the way. And that's what a lot of business owners aren't doing at the moment.
Yeah, and for years we've been doing that with like a forecasted org chart, where we look at, the 12-month perspective of where we want to be in 12 months, and then reverse engineering, what that next hire looks like in order of priority. And it works great for us, because we know in order to get here, we need these people in these positions. Otherwise, it's not going to become a reality. And sometimes some of those positions aren't positions. They're like tools or technologies or whatever. There's there's things that you can replace when you've got it mapped out. You can go, oh, okay, well, what's the most efficient way to do this? Well, we can do that. Bang, and it's just puts things into perspective. So if you guys aren't doing that, I really encourage you to just. I mean, you've obviously got your existing org chart. That's where you are right now. But like, if you want to get to the next place, what does that look like from a business structure perspective? It's a good exercise to go. And in truth, that's like the starting point for all of our strategy sessions. Really, we look at, okay, well, what's the bigger picture goals here, and then bang, let's work the org chart out. What does it have to look like in order to get there?
Yeah, we could talk for days on structure.
Yeah.
I agree. Structure, fundamentally, every business is hung together by structure. And so many businesses, and I know it goes against the norm a little bit, but so many businesses want that magic system to solve the problem. But I'm a big believer that systems always come after structure. Structure first, people second, systems third. And if you can get that structure and people right, then the systems will definitely flow along the back end. But they definitely go hand in hand.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to. You can't steer a parked car. Like you've got to get things moving in order to be able to systemize it. I think that's probably in the early days where maybe we slipped up too. Like we were so focused on, creating processes on something that probably didn't need a process at that point. It just needed like momentum so that we could create a process that was relevant. And all these processes are, of course, a work in progress, which is exactly what we're talking about here. It's recruitment. Like it's a work in progress. It's never done. It's never like, it's not a destination. It's a constant journey of evolution. You're always finding new ways and better ways to do something. And you got to test, you got to try different things, like as we've already touched on, what you did yesterday might not work today. So, you got to be willing to accept that. And that whole mentality of, well, if it ain't broke, ain't going to try, don't fix it. Like that's not going to fly.
The other big thing that I'm big on is breeding your own future talent from within. And a great example of, I've got two stories here. One is when I first got into coaching many years ago, I remember working with a mechanic. Now, he'd already deployed this strategy. This is something that I didn't do with him, but it's stuck with me ever since. This guy was based in Brisbane, and he had this big workshop, and finding mechanics is super hard. They're super hard to be able to find good mechanics. And I remember going into his business, and he had like 14 mechanics in his organization. Every one of them had come from an apprenticeship from within.
Yeah.
And that stuck with me for so long, where I'm like, this dude's plays a long game in business, where so many people are trying to fix the problem today. Now, absolutely, you got to find to fix the gap in your ground crew and in your management crew today. You have to do that. But so many don't put an emphasis enough on where they're going in the next 2 to 3 to 5 years and breeding from within. And this guy had bred every one of his good quality mechanics from being from apprenticeships all the way through. And what I loved about it is he had a great culture. They all knew the standards, the expectations. They were high quality mechanics, and that he'd brought them all through the ranks. And I really loved that. And a great example of where this was evident, I was talking to a HVAC business the other day, and he's like, Rob, I just can't find any tradesmen. And so when we unpacked his team, his ratios between tradesmen and apprentices were out, and his tradesmen were doing apprenticeship work where they were doing grunt work. I'm like, mate, our next hires aren't 3 tradesmen. Our next 3 hires are 3 apprentices, and you can stagger them between first years, second years, and third years, so that as they move through the ranks over the next couple of years, you've bred those tradesmen through. Yeah. So not only is it going to bring your average labor cost rates down, you're going to get your tradesmen working on more higher value tasks, which can get through the job quicker. They can delegate all the grunt work down to an apprentice, and you fix your recruitment problem. So that business owner was just blinded to it because he's like, I just need another tradesman. But I think when you get in there and design your team and your structure and how all your org structure is all unpicked, sometimes it's a different position than you're expecting. And that's what I talk about when you've got to think strategically. You've got to look at what your structure needs now and into the future, not just trying to fix what you've got immediately going. And I'm a big believer in apprentices because A, they're a bit cheaper, but B, you're fixing your recruitment problem in the next couple of years. So I'm a massive advocate of it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the first company I ever worked for was a plumbing company on the North Shore, and to this day, there are literally the majority of the company that are still there that when I was there 20 odd years ago, and I just think like it's unbelievable. There's a plumbing company in the North Shore, and they've just got this amazing retention, and I mean it's flabbergasting. But most of them came up through apprenticeships, and I think the advantage of that is, of course, one of the big advantages is you're training people from the get go to do things your way.
Yeah.
And it becomes really tricky when we see this all the time when people are hiring for, like qualified tradesmen or whatever, and those tradespeople have their way, and their way may not always gel with your way. And in a lot of cases, it results in them leaving or them being asked to leave because of that clash, and that resistance at that point. We're like, well, we've done it this way and it works fine. That whole attitude, which is a cultural, clash, then it can cause a lot of friction. And the same applies. We see this a lot as well within acquisitions. When businesses buy other businesses and they're bringing an existing team into a new ecosystem with new ways of doing things, new systems and policies and process and that kind of stuff, and things just then the team members don't necessarily like that new approach, and as a result, end up leaving. There's definitely I agree with you. Like bringing people up and developing them internally, whether they're apprentices or not. I suppose we're going to get onto this in the next episode, but like the emphasis should very much be on that training and that education, which is training people to do things your way, which is essentially what an apprenticeship is. But it doesn't always have to be apprentices either.
Mm. Yeah, how many times have you heard someone say my third year is better than the tradesman I've just hired? Like heaps, because they've been trained for 3 years on properly how to do a job, whereas a lot of people don't get trained well in other organizations. Because let's face it, there's plenty of shit trades and construction businesses out there who don't develop their team. And so that gives you the edge in your business if you can train and develop and breed from within. It goes a long way in fixing your recruitment problem, but it also goes a long way in solving your retention strategy as well, because you're developing your people and they won't want to leave. And so I think bringing up people up through the ranks, but you've noticed here that I haven't given any quick fix strategies. Recruitment and growing a business is a long game. We've got a plumber based on the border between New South Wales and Victoria. He's just found two guys, and he's been on the hunt for 6 months. But for one of these guys, he's been in his ear to come across for 18 months. And so he's played the long game and just been chip at this guy. And he's finally coming across, and he's going to be starting in the new year for him. But that's what it takes in business. You've got to see something, that recruitment is something that you commit to. Every time you go to site, you're asking people. Every time you go to your supplier, you're asking people. Every time you have a toolbox talk, you're asking your team. You're consistently posting on Seek. You have a really good social presence. You consistently outward bound having conversations. And that's what it takes these days to find really good people. And recruitment's one of those things that you've got to dedicate yourself to, because let's face it, if you want to keep growing your business, you have to keep finding arms and legs to be able to come and build out your teams and keep growing that revenue.
So let's wrap this episode up. We're going to come back in the second part of this series. We're going to talk about team retention and things that you can do, internally to improve your attrition across the board and, make people want to stay there. Of course, as we've touched on, recruitment is the first part, but the much harder part is keeping them, right? So all this stuff that we've talked about, essentially in the next episode, we want to talk about how you can put firewalls up against other people trying to approach team members and making them leave. So I'm looking forward to that. Rob, thanks for joining us again. Guys, go check out pravargroup.com. That's Pravar group.com. And I'll leave some contact details and things like that for Rob in the show notes. So you head across there and you can get hold of those. Anything else you want to close off on, Rob, before we jump ship?
I don't think so, mate. It's hopefully the listeners got value.
All right, that's a wrap. Be sure to hit the subscribe and ring that notification bell to make sure that you don't miss out on the 2 upcoming episodes of this series. And as always, we would love to hear your comments and your feedback and your experiences. So please leave them in the comments below. And while we're there, go and share this video with someone else that would benefit from it. Cheers.